Hey everybody, what's up? This is VT Robo Guy here doing a really quick card review from all of the options that we've talked about for Etali out of the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Magic the Gathering set, both of the main set and the Commander expansion. Let's jump right in. So our first option here that we've talked about is Northampton Farm. It's a land, adds for one colorless. You can tap one, exile target creature you own, and tap two, sacrifice or return that creature exiled with the land back to the battlefield under your control. It's really a flicker effect, if you would. So this is a way that you can have a non-spell way flicker Tali. Unfortunately, you have to spread it over 2 turns, so in most Turbo Tali lists, it's not fast enough. On top of that, you need to have more colored sources, so you don't really want to invest in too many colorless land sources like this. So probably going to be a pass. Our next card here is Party Dude. This is a class. So for this enchantment, it's 1 green. When the class enters, each player creates a food token. And for 1 and a green, you get to level 2 whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. This is a updated version, probably an upgrade of Verdian Revel, which is another enchantment that does a similar thing on level 2. That is 1 green, and it's whenever any artifact goes into graveyard, you draw a card. So this is a little bit downgraded in the fact that it only triggers off of your opponent artifacts instead of yours, but it is upgraded in a way that each player gets a food token. So this has a little bit up and down side. Again, I think this is a pass right now for Etali, but it can maybe see some play later on if we get into a super heavy artifact meta. Anytime we'd want to play Verdian Revel, we'd want to play this. And this is probably a little bit better for our deck since we can get out early. Otherwise, it's a pass. Next, we have Shell Shock. This card is interesting because it does a pretty good impression of Pyrokinesis. So for its X1 red and instant, for each opponent, choose up to 1 target creature that player controls. It deals X damage to each of those creatures, and you get to create a mutagen token. So for this one, you'd pay 1 and an X to be able to deal 1 damage across 3 boards. So it could ping down a couple of irrelevant threats. It can take out a Orcish Bowmaster and some other little things like a Ragavan potentially. You pay more into it and you can get to a mana value that could be better than a Pyrokinesis. The downside, obviously, it's not a free spell. I'd keep an eye on this. This isn't bad, but also there's other creature removal spells that are better if you're going for a single target. For example, Lightning Bolt. I just want to note that it's kind of a similar impression of Pyrokinesis here, although not nearly as good. I'd still pass on it. Next, we have Tempestra, Dame of Gains. This one looks pretty good on the face level. It's 1 in a red creature. It's a 1/3. For 2 in a red, you can sack an artifact and create a token of another target creature you control, except it isn't legendary. It gains haste and sack at the beginning of the next end step. This is a copy effect that looks good on the surface for Etali. We get to create another Etali. It's great, right? Well, it doesn't have haste. So in the Turbo Etali build, anything in cEDH, you really are not going to want that in your deck, especially because it's a heavy cost. So it's 3 mana and you have to sack an artifact, so it has a lot of setup. If you compare that to Jaxus, you can blitz out Jaxus for 1 in a red, and you can activate the ability instantly. So unfortunately, this is another pass for the deck. Casey Jones. This is a very interesting card that I actually would consider as a potential card in Etali, especially more of this semi-Gruul variants that are more about having more continuance and mid-range potential. This is 3 mana. When it enters, you draw 3 cards. At the beginning of your next upkeep, discard 3 cards at random. This is a potential way to just keep on pushing through. The best comparison we have probably in our current deck is Harrogast, because when you cast Harrogast, you exile your hand and draw 3 cards. I would much rather have Harrogast over Casey Jones, but it is something to keep a lookout for. I don't think we'd want it for any other reason besides the draw 3 when it enters. It's tutorable off of X tutor spells. It's tutorable off of your green tutor spells, but other than that, I don't know if it makes the cut. It's interesting though. For now, it's a watch list. I would not include in my deck for now. This card will definitely get include, but it's a new printing. This is a new printing of Food Chain. If you like weird looking pizza, you want to do this food chain. So it's another just an alternate printing. So we don't have too many printings. So it'd be cool to add that if you like that art. Next, we have a card called Jenica's Technique. This is interesting to me because these sneak mechanics actually are pretty interesting when you think about Etali builds. This compared to the other card that does X and a red damage across 3 boards is a little bit better, I think. What's interesting about Sneak is that it's effectively a rebuy of Etali back to hand for another cast. And I do think there's some potential here. To be able to swing with Etali usually won't be blocked because it's so big, and to be able to sneak that back to your hand and wipe some of the board for 1 red is a very interesting way that we can kind of do some tempo and control. We probably wouldn't want to always do that, but the sneak mechanic to me is actually pretty interesting, and I want to play around with it. So this is a maybe, like a watch. If we get into a very heavy creature meta, especially like a Rog Thras meta, even more, they want to take down a whole bunch of tokens. This can be very interesting. Next, we have Mona Lisa Science Geek. I'm just including it here because it's just another tapper. If we have a way to really pump up this power, it could be good, but it is not that great. So just as a note, if we do have any deck builds that get this power insanely high, it could be interesting, but for right now, not great. Next, we have Ninja Pizza. This one has been talked about a little bit as a comparison to maybe Carpet of Flowers, but not nearly as good in my book. So it's 2 and a green enchantment. Foods you control have sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, so basically turns them into treasure. At the beginning of your second main phase, create a food token. So effectively, this costs 2 mana because you get 1 back in second main. This is a cool card, and unfortunately, we're not really doing much with food in our deck. We're not even playing mostly Cabbage Merchant and things like that. So for us, it's probably a little bit slow. If you want this effect, just run Carpet of Flowers. It'll probably do better than this on mana rate. But it is something interesting to watch. If we ever pivot over into a food type build, maybe. But for right now, it's a pass. Next, we have Trans-Dimensional Bovine. This is interesting because it's a 3 mana. Then you can add 2 mana of any one color. It's 6 rounds to 0/4. To me, it's kind of like a worse Somberwald Sage. For that one, you'd pay 2 and a green for 3 creature lock mana. So since we're not playing Somberwald Sage, we're probably not playing Transdimensional Bovine. So it's likely not going to make the cut, but it's interesting to talk about. The art is sick. I think it's really funny, but it probably won't make the cut for Etali. Next, we have Weather Maker. This one is interesting to me, but once again, probably doesn't make the cut. The reason why it's interesting is you can effectively get this out turn 1 off of a ramp, and then if you play a fetch, you can then have this make 2 more mana because you would get 2 charge counters on it. And then if for whatever reason the game goes long, or if you're trapped under a Dranith, this can then have removal state to it. So this is why this one's interesting to me. A 3 mana investment that gets you back 2 on turn 2, it's okay, right? That means that if you ramp into this on turn 1, that means you have 3 mana turn 1. That means you'll have, with a land drop, 6 mana turn 2. So it's pretty upside optimized. Not quite great. I do want to test with this purely for the fact that it also has some long game potential or gets you out of a spot because the removal slapped on. So not sure yet, but just I want to watch this. In theory, it might be better than putting in a thing like a Basalt because it's a one-time use, because that still only ramps you 1 mana. But this could be used every turn in theory. Probably not going to slot in yet, but I just want to keep an eye on it. This might have some interesting things. Next, we have Michelangelo Improviser. This one to me is very interesting. If I was going to play a sneak creature, this might be the one I play. Here's why. The play pattern goes like this. You have Etali out, which means you're already probably ahead. But let's say you have Etali out. You attack with Etali. No one's going to block. You sneak this in for 2 and a green. You hit with Michelangelo, and it triggers, and you put Etali back into play. So effectively, this is a 4 mana recast of Etali, which is pretty cool. So something to keep an eye on. So I mean, Then you can do it next turn to kind of sneak other creatures from your hand into play or lands into play. So it's something that's kind of interesting to me. This one I probably will be testing in probably the semi-gruel variants, just because of the sneak ability. Um, it's under cost for this effect, and the effects like this are like the big Galta that's like 7 mana. When it ETBs, you can put creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. So that might be another direction here, but this is very interesting. It doesn't do much off of a flip, but it's only good in your hand. So something worth testing for sure. Also, the sneak mechanic to rebuy other value creatures like your Eternal Witnesses, your Hellkite Courser, even like you can rebuy that, replay it. So there's a lot of options here to get value. If you have a Fury out, sure, do that. Imperial Recruiter, there's just a lot of things that can trigger here if you can get creatures through. Next, we have Broadcast Takeover. This is interesting. I think this would be a really good flip off of Etali. If you have troubles with getting your momentum in terms of keeping your flips going, um, this could do it. And if you're playing this like on turn 2, let's say you're seat 2, turn 2, and you can easily get to 5 mana, do you net gain if you cast this spell, right? Are there going to be enough artifacts on board that you actually profit? So maybe there's 2 soul rings and something like that. I don't think you're profiting off this. I don't think it's a ramp spell, especially early turns. Later turns, heck yeah. I think that it's probably the best case of a flip here. So with that, there are better things that we'd rather flip right now that we don't play, like Glimpse the Impossible, gets you cards or mana the next turn. So, for 5 mana, do we want that in our deck? I'm not sure. So it's a maybe. I want to see how it plays out. I'm not going to be slotting this in immediately. This is something I want to kind of see how the meta goes, and if it gets into a very heavy artifact meta, like if everyone plays a Taru and everyone has tapped treasures, then it's great, right? So because then you get the untapped treasures and you get to sack them. Likely, if you are up against the board and you try to take their treasures, they're going to sack them in response, so it won't really matter. But we'll see. It could be something really cool. Next, we have Raphael's Technique. Okay, so on the face value, this looks pretty cool because it's a instant speed wheel, which is pretty nice. It's an optional wield, which is not as nice. In Etali, I think we really want to. We prefer forced wheels because we need to use that to get people off of their mulliganed hands, their sculpted hands. We've come off of the optional wheels on this. Like we don't play like the wheels misfortune, for example. Some people have played the Will of the Just Guy, which has an optional wheel, but isn't that great. So on that note alone, it's going to be a difficult add. Where it gets interesting is that the sneak thing again returns your Etali back to hand, but the problem is that if you return it to hand, you're discarding that then back to command zone. So in the worst, if you do this, you are going to then be taxing your Etali again to recast, which maybe isn't a bad idea. It can, if you already have a token copy of Etali, you can return that, but the problem here is then you want to draw into clones likely. So if you're returning a different creature to hand, heck yeah, this is great. 3 mana instant speed wheel in combat, love it. I just don't foresee me slotting in yet because Wheel of Fortune for me is a very big tool to get people off of their starting hands and to later refill. So for those reasons, I'll probably wait on this to see how it plays out as well, but it's very interesting to me. Our last card here to check out for TMNT for Etali is Ralph and Maki Troublemakers. This is interesting because it can do multiple things. It has haste, so if you get it off of a flip, it's not dead, right? We can ramp to 7, so we can just cast it off of our hands and play that. But once again, we would rather cast Etali here, I guess. So the question for this card is when do we actually want to use it, right? So let's say we flip into it. We flip into it, it's another value when we get to reveal the top until we get a creature card. Now, for that, I'd say that we want to make sure that we are on value creatures and not as many dorks. That has been more of my play on my list where I'm off of some dorks. I'm on more value creatures. So the bad hits off this could be like Orcish Bowman, not Orcish, Orcish Lumberjack could be a pretty bad hit off this. Other things that could be bad are, let me see my list. Um, there's a couple of low value hits here. So if we go to my list here, let me see. We'll go to my semi-gruel list right now that I'm running. Um, so on this list here, bad hits for me could be things like Dualcaster Mage is a bad hit, right? Elvish Spirit Guide would be a bad hit. Other than that, like Hairgas is a marginal hit. Everything else is okay. You wouldn't want to hit Rionia because you're already in combat. Um, Other stuff is all right. So the other thing about this is that it's on the battlefield, so that's not bad. So you use the next turn. I think it's just probably not close enough, and there's better effects for 7 mana that we can have access to than this. So this probably doesn't make the cut either. All right, that's all the stuff from TMNT that I found for Etali. Which ones have you found that you're excited about? What did I miss? Put in the comments, and I'll talk to you later about Etali stuff.